The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, just like it did every weekday. David rolled out of bed, splashed cold water on his face, and pulled on his navy blue work uniform. By 5:15, he was walking through the back entrance of Riverside Shopping Center, keys jangling at his hip. Most people didn't think much about who cleaned the floors they walked on or fixed the toilets they used. David had made peace with that a long time ago. He took pride in his work anyway. When shoppers arrived at 10, the floors would be spotless, the windows would gleam, and everything would be in working order. That was enough for him. He'd been doing this job for 3 years now. The pay wasn't great, but it was honest work with decent hours that let him take care of what mattered most. His father had been sick, really sick, and someone needed to be there for the old man. The corporate real estate job David used to have paid better, sure, but it demanded 60-hour weeks and constant travel. When his dad got the diagnosis, David didn't think twice. He quit, found something simpler, and moved back home. The shopping center had about 30 stores, ranging from small local shops to a few upscale boutiques. Most of the store owners were pretty decent folks. Mrs. Peterson at the bookstore always saved him coffee and a donut. The young couple who ran the electronics shop would joke around with him during his breaks. Even Mr. Harrison, who owned the expensive jewelry store, treated him with respect and always said good morning. But then there was Victoria. Victoria Chen ran Elite Fashion, the biggest boutique in the center. It sat right on the main floor with huge display windows and fancy mannequins wearing clothes that cost more than David's monthly rent. She was in her mid-30s, always dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine, and carried herself like she owned the entire world. The first time David met her, he'd been cleaning the corridor outside her store. She walked past him without a word, her heels clicking sharply on the floor he'd just mopped. She tracked in mud from the parking lot, lots of it. David watched the dirty footprints trail behind her and sighed. He mopped the area again without complaining. The second time, he had to fix a broken shelf in her stockroom. He knocked, announced himself, and entered with his toolbox. Victoria was with a customer, showing her an expensive handbag. She glanced at David, wrinkled her nose slightly, and turned her back to him. She didn't say hello, didn't acknowledge him at all. It was like he was invisible. Over the months, it got worse. Victoria would snap her fingers when she needed his attention, like he was a dog. She'd point at things without speaking. Once, when he was repairing a broken lock on her storage closet, she had a phone conversation right over his head, complaining loudly to someone about how these maintenance people always took forever and didn't know what they were doing. David just kept working. He'd learned a long time ago that some people were like that. You couldn't change them, and getting upset only made your own day worse. The real problem started about 6 months into his job there. Victoria's store had a small leak under the sink in her back room. David came in to fix it early one morning before the store opened. He had the pipe apart and was working on replacing a worn gasket when Victoria burst in 2 hours earlier than her usual arrival time. "What are you doing?" she demanded, staring at the tools spread across her floor. "Fixing the leak, ma'am. There was a work order put in yesterday. Should just be another 10 minutes. 10 minutes? I have inventory arriving in 20 minutes. I can't have this mess here." David looked up at her. "I can come back later if you'd prefer, but the leak's been getting worse. If we don't fix it now, you might have water damage in your stockroom." Victoria's expression hardened. "Fine, but hurry up. And don't touch anything except what you need to fix," as if he was going to steal her overpriced scarves. David finished the job in 8 minutes and cleaned up every trace of his work. Victoria didn't thank him. She just stood there with her arms crossed, watching him like a security guard. After that, she started complaining about him to management. The issues she brought up were petty and mostly made up. She said he'd scratched her floor once, though David knew for a fact he hadn't. She claimed he'd been rude to her customers, which was impossible since he always worked before or after store hours. She even said his cleaning chemicals smelled bad and were driving away her clientele. The shopping center manager, a reasonable guy named Tom, knew Victoria was being difficult. He'd seen how she treated people, but she paid high rent for that prime location, so he had to take her complaints seriously. He'd call David into his office, they'd talk it through, and Tom would usually end the conversation with an apologetic shrug. "Just try to stay out of her way," Tom would say. "Some tenants are just high maintenance." David did his best. He scheduled his cleaning around her store's busiest hours. He tried to be quick and quiet when he had to work there. but Victoria seemed to go out of her way to find problems. The worst incident happened on a busy Saturday afternoon. A pipe had burst in the ceiling above Victoria's store and water was dripping onto her display racks. David got the emergency call and rushed over with his ladder and tools. The store was full of customers, and Victoria was in the middle of a big sale. He set up his ladder as discreetly as possible in the corner and climbed up to access the ceiling panel. He was working fast, trying to get the water shut off before it caused serious damage. "Excuse me." Victoria's voice cut through the store like a knife. "Excuse me? Can you not do this right now?" David looked down at her from the ladder. Water was literally dripping onto expensive merchandise. "Ma'am, I need to stop this leak before I am in the middle of a sale." "This is completely unprofessional. You're disrupting my customers and making my store look like a construction site." Several customers had stopped shopping to watch the scene. David felt his face get hot, but he kept his voice calm. "I understand, but if I don't fix this now, you're going to have much bigger problems." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. She pulled out her phone and called Tom right there in front of everyone. David could hear her voice getting louder as she complained about him, demanding he be removed from her store immediately and possibly fired for incompetence. David finished stopping the leak while she ranted. When he climbed down, she was still on the phone. He packed up his tools and left without a word. Tom called him later that evening. "Don't worry about it," he said. "I know you were just doing your job. But man, she really has it out for you." David lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling. He thought about his old life, his old career. He'd managed multi-million-dollar property deals. He'd negotiated with developers and city planners. He'd worn expensive suits and made decisions that affected hundreds of people. Now he was being yelled at for fixing a leak. But he thought about his father, asleep in the next room. The old man had worked his whole life in a factory, never complaining, always doing what needed to be done for his family. He'd taught David that dignity didn't come from what job you did or how people treated you. It came from how you carried yourself and what you stood for. So David decided he'd keep showing up, keep doing good work, keep being professional, even when others weren't. He had no idea that everything was about to change. 3 months after the pipe incident, David's father passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was expected, but that didn't make it any easier. The funeral was small and simple, just how the old man would have wanted it. Standing at the graveside, David felt a strange mix of grief and relief. His father wasn't suffering anymore, and David had been there for him when it mattered most. That was something. What David hadn't expected was the envelope from his father's lawyer a week later. His dad had been saving money for decades, living modestly and investing carefully. Between the life insurance, the paid-off house, and various savings accounts, David inherited nearly $200,000. Combined with his own savings from his years in real estate, he suddenly had close to $350,000 sitting in his bank account. For the first few days, he just went to work like normal, still processing everything, but his mind kept wandering during his shifts. What was he going to do now? He was 34 years old with no obligations tying him down anymore. He could go back to commercial real estate. He could travel. He could do anything. One morning, while mopping the main corridor, he overheard 2 shop owners talking near the coffee kiosk. "Did you hear? The ownership group is selling the whole shopping center," Mrs. Peterson from the bookstore was saying. "Really? Why?" asked the electronics store owner. "Financial trouble, from what I heard. They own 3 other properties that aren't doing well, and they need to liquidate assets. They're asking $4.2 million for this place." David's mop stopped moving. He stood there pretending to work while listening intently. "That seems low for this location," the electronics guy said. "This is prime real estate. It is low, but the place needs work. The parking lot's a mess, the roof needs replacing, and apparently the HVAC system is on its last legs. Whoever buys it is looking at another $1 million in repairs easily." David's brain kicked into gear. He knew this building inside and out. He knew every pipe, every wire, every structural quirk. More importantly, he knew the location was golden. The shopping center sat at a major intersection with great visibility and access. The surrounding neighborhood was growing, with new apartments and offices going up constantly. He also knew the numbers Mrs. Peterson mentioned weren't quite right. The HVAC system needed maintenance, sure, but not replacement. The roof had another 5 years in it if properly maintained. The parking lot could be resurfaced for under 50 grand. He'd reviewed enough property assessments in his old job to spot when someone was undervaluing an asset. That evening, David made some phone calls. He reached out to his old colleague Robert, who now ran his own small investment firm. "David, man, it's been ages. How have you been?" They talked for a while, and David eventually brought up the shopping center. Robert was interested immediately. "Send me the details. If the numbers are as good as you say, I might be able to pull together some investors. But David, you'd need to be involved. You know the property, and honestly, you know this business. These guys aren't going to invest with a stranger." Over the next few weeks, David worked harder than he'd ever worked. During the day, he kept up his maintenance job. At night, he put together a business plan. He analyzed foot traffic, reviewed lease agreements, studied comparable properties, and built financial projections. His old skills came flooding back like he'd never left the industry. Meanwhile, Victoria's treatment of him somehow got even worse. It was like she could sense he was distracted and took it as a personal insult. One afternoon, David was fixing a flickering light fixture in the corridor near her store. He was up on a ladder, focused on reconnecting some wiring, when Victoria walked past carrying shopping bags and a fancy coffee drink. She didn't see him or the ladder. She walked right into it, bumping it hard. David grabbed the ceiling to steady himself, his heart pounding. The ladder wobbled but didn't fall. "Watch where you put your equipment," Victoria snapped, rubbing her shoulder. Some of her coffee had spilled on her blouse. David climbed down carefully. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay. Look at my shirt. This cost $300. She gestured at the small coffee stain. "And your ladder shouldn't be in the middle of the walkway." "It's not in the middle. It's against the wall, and there's plenty of room to pass. The light was out, and it's a safety hazard." Victoria's face turned red. "Don't talk back to me. Just stay away from my store. Every time I see you, something goes wrong." She stormed off, and David heard her on the phone again, probably calling Tom to complain. He finished the repair, his hands shaking slightly. Not from fear or anger, but from something else. A growing sense that things were about to change. That weekend, David met with Robert and 4 potential investors at a coffee shop downtown. He presented his plan with confidence, showing them the property's true value and his vision for improvements. The investors asked tough questions, but David had answers for all of them. By the end of the meeting, they were in. Robert clasped his shoulder. "You put together one hell of a proposal, David. I knew you still had it in you." They made an offer of $3.8 million, below asking price, but with proof of funds and a quick closing timeline. The sellers were motivated and countered at $4 million. After some negotiation, they settled at $3.9 million. David would be putting in $200,000 of his own money and taking a salary as property manager. The investors would own 60%, and David would own 40%. More importantly, David would have full operational control. The day they signed the purchase agreement, David went to work like normal. He mopped floors, fixed a leaking faucet in the food court restroom, and replaced some burnt-out bulbs in the parking lot. Nobody knew. He wanted to keep it that way for a little while longer. He needed to see how things really operated from his current position. He needed to observe without the filter of people knowing he was about to be their landlord. It was due diligence, but it was also something more personal. During his lunch break that day, he sat on a bench near the fountain and watched people come and go. He saw Mrs. Peterson helping an elderly customer find a book. He saw the young couple in the electronics store patiently explaining a phone plan to a confused teenager. He saw the jewelry store owner chatting warmly with a family picking out an engagement ring, and he saw Victoria, standing in her store entrance, looking at her phone while her sales associate dealt with customers. When a delivery guy arrived with boxes, Victoria pointed toward the back without looking up. The delivery guy asked her something, and she waved him off dismissively. David thought about the next few months. The closing was scheduled for 45 days out. During that time, he'd continue working, continue observing, continue learning everything he could about how to make this place better. Victoria's lease was up for renewal in 4 months. He'd already read it thoroughly. She'd been late on rent 6 times in the past 2 years. She'd made unauthorized modifications to her space. She'd violated the community conduct clause multiple times with complaints filed by other tenants. David wasn't a vengeful person. He didn't want to hurt anyone, but he believed in accountability. He believed that how you treated people mattered, especially people who couldn't fight back. As he sat there on that bench, watching Victoria ignore another delivery person, David felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not the simple satisfaction of a job well done, but the deeper purpose of being able to make real change. He finished his sandwich, tossed the wrapper in the trash, and headed back to work. There was a clogged drain in the south corridor that needed attention. For now, he was still just the maintenance guy. But not for much longer. The closing happened on a Tuesday morning at a lawyer's office downtown. David signed papers for 2 hours straight, his hand cramping by the end. When it was done, he owned 40% of Riverside Shopping Center. The investors owned the rest, but David had full management authority. It was real now. He drove back to the shopping center that afternoon and parked in his usual spot in the back lot. He sat in his truck for a few minutes, just looking at the building. His building now. It felt surreal, but he wasn't ready to announce anything yet. The official transition meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks out. Until then, he wanted to keep observing, keep learning, and honestly, he wanted to see how certain people would act when they still thought he was just the maintenance guy. Tom, the old property manager, was one of the few people who knew. He'd found out during the sale process and had been both shocked and genuinely happy for David. "Man, I never would have guessed," Tom said when they met privately in his office. "You were in real estate before?" "For almost 10 years, David said. Managed commercial properties, handled acquisitions, did development consulting. It was a good career. And you gave it up to mop floors?" David smiled. "I gave it up to take care of my dad. The mopping floors part was just what came with it." Tom shook his head in amazement. "Well, you're going to be a great owner. This place needs someone who actually cares. The previous ownership group just milked it for rent money and never reinvested anything." Over the next 2 weeks, David continued his maintenance routine while carefully reviewing every aspect of the business. He went through lease files in the evenings, studied maintenance records, analyzed revenue streams, and planned improvements. He also paid close attention to Victoria. She'd been late on rent again, 12 days past due. Tom had sent her 2 reminder notices. David also discovered something interesting in her file: 3 formal complaints from other tenants about her behavior. The jewelry store owner had complained that Victoria berated one of his employees in the corridor. The coffee shop owner reported that Victoria demanded they remake her drink 4 times and then refused to pay. Mrs. Peterson from the bookstore had filed a complaint about Victoria parking in the loading zone and refusing to move, blocking a book delivery for 40 minutes. But the final straw came on a Friday afternoon. 1 week before the transition meeting, David was repairing a broken tile near the main entrance. It was detailed work, and he was kneeling on the floor with his tools spread around him. The mall was busy with weekend shoppers moving around him. Victoria came walking through with 2 large shopping bags and her phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing at something, not paying attention to where she was going. She stepped right into David's work area. Her heel came down on his hand, the one holding the tile cutter. Pain shot through David's fingers. He jerked his hand back instinctively, and the tile cutter clattered across the floor. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Victoria said, looking down at him, not asking if he was okay, not apologizing. Just annoyed that she'd been inconvenienced. David stood up, cradling his hand. His ring finger was already swelling, and there was a cut across his knuckle. "You need to be more careful where you leave your stuff," Victoria said, adjusting her bags. "Someone could get hurt." David stared at her. People were watching now, other shoppers stopping to see what was happening. "You stepped on my hand," David said quietly. "Well, you shouldn't be working in the middle of a walkway during peak hours. It's a hazard." She glanced at his bleeding hand with no emotion. "Maybe you should think about that." She walked away, heels clicking, still talking on her phone like nothing had happened. Mrs. Peterson rushed over from her nearby bookstore. "David, are you all right? I saw what happened. That was completely her fault." "I'm fine," David said, though his hand was throbbing. "That woman is unbelievable," Mrs. Peterson continued. "I've been here for 15 years and I've never seen anyone treat people the way she does. Someone needs to do something about her." David cleaned up his tools with his good hand and went to the back office to bandage his cut. Tom saw him and immediately asked what happened. When David told him, Tom's face turned red with anger. "That's it. I'm writing her up. This has gone too far. Don't worry about it, David said calmly, wrapping gauze around his knuckle. I'll handle it. Tom looked at him. The meeting's next week, right? Monday morning. 10 o'clock. All tenants required to attend. She's going to lose her mind when she finds out. David smiled slightly. Probably. That weekend, David didn't think about revenge. He thought about responsibility. He was about to become the landlord for 29 businesses and dozens of employees. What kind of landlord did he want to be? He thought about the property owners he'd worked with in his old career. Some had been fair and reasonable. Others had been tyrants who squeezed every penny from their tenants and ignored problems. He'd seen how toxic leadership poisoned entire communities. He also thought about his father, who'd taught him that respect wasn't about position or power. It was about character. The old man had treated everyone the same, whether they were the factory owner or the guy who swept the floors. On Sunday evening, David went to the shopping center after hours. He walked through every corridor, every store space, every common area. He looked at everything with fresh eyes, not as the maintenance guy, but as the owner. The building had good bones. It needed updates, better lighting, fresh paint in places. The food court could use renovation. But the core was solid. The location was perfect. And most of the tenants were good people running decent businesses. Except one. Monday morning arrived. David woke up early, but instead of putting on his maintenance uniform, he dressed in a suit. It was strange, buttoning a dress shirt and tying a tie after years of work clothes. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. He arrived at the shopping center at 8, 2 hours before the meeting. Tom met him at the management office. "You ready for this?" Tom asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." They went over the agenda one more time. David would introduce himself, outline his vision for the property, discuss some planned improvements, and answer questions. Simple and straightforward. At 9:45, tenants started arriving. David watched through the office window as they filed into the community room. Mrs. Peterson arrived early, as usual. The electronics store couple came in together, looking curious. The jewelry store owner showed up with a coffee, chatting with the hair salon owner. At 9:58, Victoria arrived, clearly annoyed at having to be there. She was wearing an expensive-looking dress and carrying her designer handbag. She walked in like she was doing everyone a favor by showing up. Tom looked at David. "It's time." David took a deep breath. He thought about the past 3 years. Every insult, every dismissive gesture, every moment of being treated like he was invisible or worthless. He thought about his bleeding hand from Friday, about Victoria stepping on him and walking away without a word. But he also thought about who he wanted to be as a leader. This moment would set the tone for everything that came after. He picked up his folder of notes and walked toward the community room. Through the window in the door, he could see Victoria sitting in the back row, texting on her phone, not even paying attention. David smiled. This was going to be interesting. He opened the door and walked in. Tom followed behind him, closing the door. The room quieted down as people noticed them. Victoria didn't even look up from her phone. "Good morning, everyone," David said, standing at the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming." His voice was different, confident, clear, authoritative. Victoria's head snapped up. She looked at him, confusion crossing her face. Why was the maintenance guy standing at the front of the room in a suit? Tom stepped forward. "I'd like to introduce you all to the new owner of Riverside Shopping Center. This is David Patterson." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Mrs. Peterson's mouth dropped open. The electronics couple looked at each other in shock. Other tenants started whispering, but David kept his eyes on Victoria. He watched the confusion on her face turn to recognition, then to disbelief, then to something that looked a lot like fear. She'd gone completely pale. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. "As Tom said, I'm the new owner here," David continued, his voice steady. "Some of you have known me in a different capacity over the past 3 years. I want you to know that experience has given me a unique perspective on how this property operates and what we need to improve." Victoria just stared, frozen in her seat, as the full weight of the situation crashed down on her. The silence in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. David stood at the front watching the faces of his tenants process what they'd just heard. Most looked shocked but pleasantly surprised. A few were smiling. Mrs. Peterson had tears in her eyes. Victoria looked like she might be sick. David continued with his presentation, keeping his tone professional and warm. He talked about his vision for the shopping center, upgraded common areas, better parking lot lighting, a new digital directory system, and regular community events to drive foot traffic. He discussed his background in commercial real estate and his commitment to being a hands-on owner who understood their needs. "I know this property inside and out," he said with a slight smile. "I've fixed most of the pipes, replaced most of the lights, and probably mopped every square inch of floor at least 100 times. That gives me a perspective that most property owners don't have." Several tenants laughed. Mrs. Peterson wiped her eyes and started clapping, and soon the whole room joined in. Everyone except Victoria, who sat frozen with her hands in her lap. "I want this to be a partnership," David went on. "Your businesses succeed, we all succeed. My door will always be open. If you have concerns, ideas, or problems, I want to hear about them. We're a community here, and I plan to treat it that way." He opened the floor for questions. The electronics store owner asked about the timeline for parking lot improvements. The coffee shop owner wanted to know about possibly expanding her lease space. The jewelry store owner asked about security upgrades. David answered each question thoughtfully, taking notes on his tablet. Victoria didn't ask a single question. She just sat there staring at the floor. After about 45 minutes, David wrapped up the meeting. "Thank you all again for your time. I'll be setting up individual meetings with each of you over the next few weeks to discuss your specific needs and lease renewals. Tom will be reaching out to schedule those." People started filing out, many of them stopping to shake David's hand or congratulate him. Mrs. Peterson hugged him tightly. "I knew you were special," she whispered. "I just knew it." The electronics couple high-fived him. "This is the best news we've had all year, man." The old ownership company didn't care about anything. Even the jewelry store owner, who was usually reserved, clapped David on the shoulder. "Good for you, really. This place needs someone who gives a damn." Victoria gathered her things slowly, clearly hoping to slip out unnoticed. But as she reached the door, David called out, "Victoria, could you stay for a moment? I'd like to speak with you." She stopped. Her shoulders tensed. Slowly she turned around. The room had emptied except for the two of them and Tom, who was gathering papers at the side table. "Have a seat," David said, gesturing to a chair. Victoria walked back and sat down stiffly, clutching her handbag like a shield. Up close, David could see she was shaking slightly. "I reviewed your lease file," David began, keeping his voice neutral. "Your current lease expires in 3 months." "I know when my lease expires," Victoria said quietly. The usual edge in her voice was gone. "Then you also know you've been late on rent payments 6 times in the past 18 months. You've made unauthorized modifications to your retail space, and there have been multiple complaints filed against you by other tenants." Victoria's face flushed red. "Those complaints are exaggerated. People are too sensitive these days, are they?" David leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Harrison said you berated his teenage employee in the hallway, called her incompetent because she couldn't give you directions to a store. The coffee shop owner said you demanded 4 remakes of your drink and then refused to pay. Mrs. Peterson said you blocked the loading zone for 40 minutes and told the delivery driver you didn't care about his schedule. I was having a bad day, and on Friday, you stepped on my hand while I was working. You looked at me bleeding on the floor and told me I should be more careful. You didn't apologize. You didn't ask if I was okay. You just walked away." Victoria's eyes dropped to the table. Her hands were gripping her bag so tightly her knuckles were white. David let the silence sit for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Victoria, why? Why do you treat people that way?" She didn't answer at first. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't know. That's not good enough. These are real people with real feelings. The delivery driver you dismissed? He's working 2 jobs to support his family. The teenager you yelled at? She's saving for college. Me? I was taking care of my dying father while you treated me like garbage every single day." A tear ran down Victoria's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, trying to maintain some composure. "I built my business from nothing," she said, her voice cracking. "I worked so hard to get where I am. I guess somewhere along the way I started thinking that success meant I was better than other people. That I'd earned the right to, I don't know, to not have to be nice. Success doesn't give you the right to be cruel," David said. "It gives you the responsibility to be better." Victoria nodded, more tears falling now. "Are you going to evict me?" David was quiet for a long moment. He thought about everything she'd put him through. The insults, the complaints, the complete disregard for his humanity. He had every right to tell her to pack up and leave. Every legal right and every moral right. But he also thought about his father's voice. Being right and being kind aren't always the same thing, son. When you have the choice, choose kind. I'm not going to evict you, David said finally, but I'm going to offer you a choice. Victoria looked up, hope and fear mixing on her face. Your lease renewal is going to come with conditions. First, rent must be paid on time every time. 1 late payment and we're done. Second, any more complaints from tenants or staff about your behavior, and the lease is terminated immediately. And third, you're going to attend professional development training on workplace conduct and conflict resolution. I'll do it, Victoria said immediately. All of it, I'll do whatever you want. I'm not done, David continued. You're also going to personally apologize to every person you've mistreated. That includes the delivery drivers, the maintenance staff, the tenants you've been rude to, and their employees. Real apologies, not just words. You need to own what you've done. Victoria was crying openly now, nodding. Okay, yes, I'll do it. And one more thing, David said, his voice firm. You need to figure out why you became this person. Because the conditions I'm giving you, they're not punishment, they're an opportunity. An opportunity to be better than you've been. Victoria covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I was horrible to you. You didn't deserve any of it. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the shopping center. His shopping center. He could see people walking through the corridors, going about their lives, their businesses, their dreams. Here's what I believe, he said, still looking out the window. I believe people can change if they really want to. I believe everyone deserves a second chance, even when they don't deserve it. But I also believe in accountability. So this is your second chance, Victoria. Don't waste it, he turned back to face her. Your lease renewal will be ready in 2 weeks. The terms I outlined will be in writing. If you can't accept them, I'll work with you to find another location and give you a good reference. But if you stay, you play by the rules. Everyone gets treated with respect in my building, everyone. No exceptions. Victoria stood up, wiping her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, like a weight had been lifted and a bigger one put in its place. Thank you, she whispered. I don't deserve this, but thank you. You're right. You don't deserve it, but maybe that's the point. Victoria walked to the door, then paused and turned back. David, for what it's worth, your father would be proud of you. Not because you're successful or because you own this place, but because you're a good person despite having every reason not to be. She left quietly, and David stood alone in the empty room. Tom came back in a few minutes later. That was something, he said. You could have crushed her. Why didn't you? David thought about it. Because crushing people doesn't make them better. It just makes them broken. I'd rather see if she can grow. And if she can't, then she'll be gone in 3 months anyway. But at least I'll know I tried to do the right thing, Tom smiled. You're going to be a hell of a landlord. David looked down at his bandaged hand, the one Victoria had stepped on just days ago. It still hurt, but it was healing. Maybe she could heal too. Maybe they all could. 3 months passed and Riverside Shopping Center started to transform. David hired a small crew to repaint the common areas in warm, welcoming colors. He upgraded the lighting throughout the building, making everything brighter and more inviting. The parking lot got fresh asphalt and new striping. He even added planters with flowers near the entrances. But the biggest changes weren't physical. They were human. David kept his promise about being accessible. His office door stayed open most days, and tenants would stop by to chat about ideas or concerns. He learned about their families, their struggles, their dreams. The electronics couple was saving to buy a house. Mrs. Peterson's grandson had just started college. The coffee shop owner was thinking about opening a second location. He also kept his maintenance skills sharp. Once a week, he'd put on his old work clothes and help the new maintenance team with projects. It reminded him where he came from and kept him connected to the building in a way that mattered. As for Victoria, the first few weeks were rough. She signed the lease renewal with all of David's conditions. The rent started arriving 3 days early every month, like clockwork. But the apologies were harder for her. David watched from a distance as she approached the delivery drivers she'd been rude to. He saw her talking quietly with Mr. Harrison's young employee. She met with Mrs. Peterson at the bookstore for almost an hour one afternoon. Some people accepted her apologies easily. Others were skeptical. But Victoria kept at it, and slowly something started to shift. One morning, about 6 weeks after the big meeting, David was helping install new shelving in the storage room when he heard a familiar voice. "Excuse me? Could someone help me with these boxes?" He stepped out to see Victoria standing in the corridor with a delivery driver, both of them holding packages. The driver looked tired and frustrated. "The elevator's broken," Victoria was explaining. "But my store is just down here. Let me take a couple of these and we can make 2 trips instead of you doing it all yourself." The driver looked surprised. "Are you sure? These are pretty heavy, I'm sure. Come on." David watched as Victoria carried boxes alongside the delivery driver, making small talk and actually smiling. When they finished, she thanked the driver and even gave him a bottle of water from her store. It was a small thing. But small things mattered. The conflict resolution training Victoria attended turned out to be more intense than she'd expected. It was a 6-week course that met every Tuesday evening. She told David about it once when she stopped by his office to drop off her rent check early. "It's uncomfortable," she admitted, standing in his doorway. "They make you role-play situations and examine why you react the way you do. Last week I had to talk about my childhood in front of 15 strangers. Is it helping?" David asked. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, it is. I realized I spent so long trying to prove I was successful that I forgot how to just be decent. My parents were immigrants who worked horrible jobs and got treated terribly. I think I decided that once I made it, I'd never let anyone look down on me again. But somewhere along the way, I became the person looking down on everyone else." "That takes guts to admit," David said. "I'm trying to be better. Some days are easier than others." She paused. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Most people would have." After she left, Tom poked his head into the office. "Did I just see Victoria Chen being humble?" David laughed. "People can surprise you." But not everyone was convinced. Mr. Harrison remained wary, and a few other tenants kept their distance from Victoria. David understood. Trust once broken took time to rebuild. Maybe some bridges couldn't be fully repaired. But he appreciated that Victoria was trying. The real test came about 10 weeks in. A new tenant was moving into a vacant space next to Victoria's store. The business owner was a young woman named Lisa, who was opening her first boutique. She was nervous and excited, working 18-hour days to get everything ready for her grand opening. One evening, David was walking through the building after hours when he heard voices. He followed the sound to Lisa's store and found Victoria inside, helping Lisa arrange clothing racks. "If you put the register here," Victoria was saying, "customers will flow naturally through the space. And these featured items should go in the window where people can see them from outside." Lisa was taking notes frantically. "This is so helpful. I have no idea what I'm doing," Victoria smiled. "None of us did at first. I made every mistake in the book when I started. Let me show you how I organize my stockroom. It'll save you hours every week." David backed away quietly, not wanting to interrupt. But his chest felt warm. This was who Victoria could be when she wasn't trying to prove anything. The next morning, Lisa stopped by David's office with coffee and a huge smile. "Your tenant Victoria spent 3 hours helping me last night," she gushed. "She gave me advice on inventory management, supplier relationships, even social media marketing. She didn't have to do any of that." "Victoria can be full of surprises," David said. "She told me about what happened, about how she used to be. She said she's trying to pay it forward now to be the kind of business neighbor she wishes she'd had starting out." Lisa set the coffee on his desk. "I just wanted you to know. I think what you did, giving her that second chance, it's making a real difference." As the 3-month mark approached, David had to make a decision about the long-term lease terms. Victoria's probationary period was technically over. He could offer her a standard renewal, or he could keep the strict conditions in place, or he could ask her to leave. He called her into his office on a Thursday afternoon. Victoria sat down, looking nervous. "Is everything okay?" "Your 3 months are up," David said. "Your rent has been on time. No complaints from other tenants. You've completed the training. You've done everything I asked. But," Victoria said, sensing there was more. "No but. I'm offering you a 5-year lease. Standard terms, fair rent increase based on market rates. No special conditions." Victoria's eyes widened. "Really? You've earned it. You did the work. You changed. That's not easy, and you should be proud of it." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes. "I don't know what to say." Say you'll keep being the person you've become, not the person you were. Victoria wiped her eyes and laughed. Deal. A year later, Riverside Shopping Center was thriving. Occupancy was at 100% with a waiting list. Sales were up across almost every store. The community events David organized brought hundreds of people through every month. Local news even did a feature story on the center's turnaround. David was in his office one afternoon when Victoria knocked on his door. She had something in her hands, a framed photograph. "I wanted to give you this," she said, handing it to him. It was a picture from the shopping center's one-year anniversary celebration. David was in the center, surrounded by all the tenants and their employees. Everyone was smiling, laughing. Victoria was right next to him, and on his other side was the entire maintenance crew, including the team members who'd replaced his old position. "I had copies made for everyone," Victoria explained, "but I wanted you to have this one personally. See what you wrote on the back?" David flipped the frame over. In Victoria's handwriting it said, "Family isn't just blood. It's the people who see you at your worst and help you become your best." "That's what you did for me," Victoria said softly. "When you had every reason to throw me out, you saw something worth saving." "I'll never forget that." David felt his throat tighten. "You did the hard part. You changed yourself, because someone believed I could." Victoria smiled. "I tell my employees now, treat everyone with respect no matter what their job title is. You never know who they really are or what they're going through, and even if they're exactly who they appear to be, they still deserve kindness." After Victoria left, David hung the photograph on his wall right next to his father's picture. The old man was smiling in that photo, proud and strong before the illness took hold. "We did okay, Dad," David whispered to the picture. "I think we did okay." His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, the boutique owner Victoria had helped. She'd just signed a lease for a second location across town and wanted David's advice on the space. Mrs. Peterson sent a message about organizing a book club that would meet at the center. The electronics couple forwarded him an article about small business success stories, saying he should be featured. David leaned back in his chair and looked around his office. On the wall was his college degree in business administration, right next to his father's old work badge from the factory. His maintenance uniform hung on a hook in the corner. He still wore it sometimes, not because he had to, but because he wanted to remember. The journey from maintenance worker to property owner might seem like a dramatic change to some people. But David knew the truth. He was the same person he'd always been, the same person who believed in hard work, in treating people right, in second chances and new beginnings. Success hadn't changed him. It had just given him a bigger platform to live out the values his father had taught him. And that, David thought as he looked at the photograph of his shopping center family, was exactly how it should be.